Hello, Dharma Talk community, and welcome back to a surprise bonus episode of Dharma Talk. I'm your host, Henry Winslow, and this week, the tables have turned. I am in the hot seat for an interview for once with Grant Crawford and Keith Vartanian of the 20-somethings podcast. And for a little change of pace, I thought I'd recut it and share it out with you guys. When asked about the show, the hosts describe it simply as, quote, social commentary or, quote, sort of like group therapy, unquote. And this is a fun conversation to have. We cover a wide range of topics, including but not limited to mindfulness and yoga in the education system, the line between cultural appropriation and cultural exchange, making a living as a yoga teacher and the side hustle lifestyle, reframing perspectives around failure and performance, and modern spirituality and balancing faith with the rejection of dogma. So, no announcements this week. Just want to cut right into this episode. Hope you enjoy, and if you like it, check out their show, the 20-somethings podcast, available on all your favorite podcast directories. Without further ado, please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with myself, Grant Crawford, and Keith Vartanian.
Let's just get to the episode. Give it up for Mr. Henry Winslow. Dun, 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 dun.
We're alive.
Hello, Henry.
We're
Welcome
alive.
to 20-somethings.
Thank you.
Thanks
Happy
for coming
to be
over.
here.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to work this out.
Glad you were able to fit me in before I escaped the 20-somethings bracket.
Yeah.
29 years
How
old.
Are you?
Yeah.
When's 30 coming about?
April 23rd.
Whoa.
Nice. Now you got some time.
I got some time.
You got some
Yeah.
time.
Do you have like some 30 anxiety about that? Like, I know some people that's a big deal, right?
You know, I don't have too much anxiety about it. I think a lot of my friends are already past 30, so they dealt with that already, and I just lived through the stress vicariously, and I'm cool with it now.
I feel like once you hit like 23 and you keep having, it's like the birthdays don't even matter anymore. It just kind of all blends together. It's like, 24,
Well, what is
25.
30, like, because of the, like, everybody delays. Like, it's not, everybody doesn't move as quick as they used to, right? So 30, like, as far as, like, passing those thresholds, like 30 used to be like you have kids and you're settled down in a house in the suburbs, and that's not really like
It's not what it is anymore.
Yeah, well,
right?
Especially for those of us who live in New York, like we have
Yeah.
alternative paths.
Yeah. It's weird when you talk to people that, like, I don't know if you have any like friends back in I come from a suburb, and they all are, they're already getting married, they're having kids, they're like at least thinking about it. And 30 is definitely still their threshold. But it's weird how like that works in New York, where it's like, yeah, maybe, but probably not.
Right.
Like, it might not happen by that point, and that's fine.
Yeah, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, which is not too far geographically south, but culturally speaking, still very much American South. And, like the girls did the debutante balls when they were ready to be presented for marriage. Which is crazy. I mean, it's like ritualistic, and it's a little bit, I think there's an appreciation for the like tongue-in-cheek aspect of it. But yeah, I mean, people get married very young.
Yeah, it totally is a cultural thing too. And it's strange to see that like within like one country. But we see that with like girls we went to college with that were from like North Carolina, South Carolina.
Oh yeah,
like, the further south you get, there's traditions that come along with that. It happens
earlier and earlier too. It's an interesting thing.
Are you happy with like the past decade, the 20s? Or is it a good one?
I'm happy with where my life is right now. I never would have predicted it, I don't think,
Why?
10 years ago.
What's unpredictable about it?
I think just, 10 years ago, I was following a much more traditional path and didn't really question it much because, when you're growing up, everything is just so like, I'm taking this step to get to the next step, to get to the next step. And you never really have to sit with anything.
Yeah.
You're always focused on preparing yourself for what's coming next. And you're like getting ready to apply to college. And even before that, it's like, what makes my resume look good, or my application, whatever. And then what makes my resume look good.
Yeah.
And it isn't until you actually are in a day-to-day life that doesn't actually necessarily go anywhere. It's like, okay, am I happy with this?
Right. Like, am I okay right now? Like, is this going well?
Right.
Or should I really be looking, days ahead?
Yeah.
That's a very meditation mindset to have as well. So, and I don't know if you want to introduce yourself because we
Yeah,
right
sure.
on
We
the
didn't say
30s.
what you do yet.
Sure, yeah. Okay, my name's Henry Winslow, and I am a yoga teacher. So yes, I mean, the meditation is a big piece of that. But, for me, my introduction to yoga was definitely not geared toward that end. It was more of like an after effect, which has since become very important. But at the time, I was just looking for something to keep up my flexibility and strength, very physical focus in the beginning because I was a springboard diver.
Okay.
Yeah, I came to New York one summer in between my junior and senior year of college. And at the time I was diving in college. It was like my sport, my main extracurricular activity. And I didn't have access to a pool here. Like I probably could have gone to the Y or something, but it would have been probably pretty grungy, and there weren't, like competitive level diving boards, and I didn't have all my stuff, all my equipment to train, or a coach for that matter.
Right.
So I connected to one of my old teammates who had already graduated, was living in New York, and he's like, Henry, man, you got to come with me to yoga. You're going to love yoga. It's like you get to do all of this body awareness stuff. It's all about proprioception, and you get to do cool tricks just like diving. Like you'll get to stand on your head and your hands eventually and all this kind of stuff. It's like, okay, cool. I'll go do that with you. And I had like a summer membership to New York Sports Club. So I went to the yoga class there at a gym. And for anyone who's listening who practices yoga knows that there's like, it's a far cry to go to a gym yoga class versus, going to a yoga studio, or even more so like developing a personal practice. So I went to that and I was like, whoa, there's something here. Even at a gym yoga class, like no knocks against New York Sports Club. They're still introducing people to yoga. That's great. I mean, that's a miracle. And, I felt immediately connected to that, and I was taking like yoga one night, and then the next night I go to capoeira, and then the next night I did boxing. So I was like sampling the goods.
Cool.
But I felt myself like more attracted to the yoga, and I kept coming back to those classes. Eventually I had my favorite teachers, and I was going around to different locations of the gym to follow the teachers, and yeah, it felt natural to me. Like I had been practicing it for a long time.
That's amazing.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say with the diving, because I know this is, my father was a gymnastics coach.
Oh, okay.
And I've heard a lot from him that a lot of gymnasts go into diving specifically.
Yes.
So were you a gymnast before you were a springboard diver, or did you just start in diving?
I was not a gymnast before I was a springboard diver, but you're absolutely right. There are tons of people that I, crossed paths with and was on teams with or competed against who had come from gymnastics, because gymnastics can be so impactful on the body.
Right.
That over time it's like, okay, let's
get
do
in water.
something where I can still do all the fun stuff, but let's land in water instead of onto a hard surface.
Well, it's really interesting what you're talking about with body awareness too, because people don't understand. I mean, they watch gymnastics and they watch diving and everything. It's like, oh, that looks really cool, but people don't understand how much. It's really the same thing with yoga.
Yeah.
How much goes into it in terms of being aware of your body and being aware of where you are in space.
Oh yeah.
And it's really like
that's
a
what I was
complicated
going to
thing.
ask, like specifically about diving, and then I guess how yoga helped enhance that. Is like when I watch the Olympics, which is usually the only time I watch diving or any,
I think that's the only time that most people see it.
I'm just so blown away. Like, how do you know where you are in the air?
In space.
Yeah. Like, how do you measure that?
Well, I think that, I think this is true of any sport, really. Like high level competitive athletes get into a meditative mode. And when you're really, really focused, things slow down.
Yeah.
Like time and space become more, I don't know if elusive is the right word, but they become more fluid. And you can really see what's happening at a different pace.
It's like flow state.
Flow state. Exactly. Yeah.
And you think that yoga really helped like expand that, or like maybe tap into that?
Well, so the twist at the end of the story is that I didn't end up going back to diving after that. I went back to school for my last year and ended up getting an opportunity to be in the singing group that took me around the world, which is a whole other story. But
well, all right, we got a lot to break down here. We got a lot to break down.
Yeah, but I will say that yes, I mean, doing yoga enhances your ability in any sport, because the whole goal of yoga, we talk about it as yoga and asana are terms that are basically interchanged these days in popular culture. Asana is the poses.
Okay.
But yoga is a much bigger science and method than that. And if you look at the original texts, they say that the goal of yoga is to stop the monkey mind, essentially, is to overcome the mental chatter in your mind that blocks you from seeing who you really are, which is the witness of all these thoughts and all of these external impressions. So if you can get to that, which is a lofty goal, of course, that's very ambitious, and it's, many lifetimes of work. But if you can get even closer to that, that's going to help with anything that you do in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's what I don't do yoga as often as I should. I mean, me and you and pretty much everybody you talk to that goes to a yoga class, right afterwards, they're like, I feel amazing. You know, that moment where you're just laying on the floor once it finished, like you really don't. Where else does that exist in your day-to-day routine, right? And I mean, I've thought about before, like, how can I tap into that and expand that and not just have it in these 2 minutes?
Well, it's kind of what I get, because I train jiu-jitsu, and it's kind of what I get in training jiu-jitsu as well. As soon as that class is over, I kind of lie on the mats and I'm like, whoa, like, that was amazing. And I think it really, you're really correct with, it taps into that, like, and high-level competitive athletes, yes, and also people that just train any sort of sport, on a day-to-day basis. If you're doing it day-to-day, it taps into that, slowing everything down and really getting out of your own head and focusing on what the task is at hand. It's like people that surf, they feel the same way. People that, people that do jiu-jitsu, people that do martial arts, people that do yoga, anything where it's like an individual task almost, or an individual sport, and you're really forced to kind of be real with yourself and be real with, like, who you are. Like, okay, I'm not that good at this pose, but you kind of have to, like, get out of your head with that. And I think that is a really, it's crazy how it happens, but I think that really is why it feels so good, is because you kind of get out of your own head for a little bit. Yeah. It's really, it's a nice feeling. I should do yoga more, too.
Like, more so than, like, the activity of it, it is that mindset that's so wonderful that it's, a lot of people talk about how yoga is kind of like oversaturated now, and it's just been taken by pop culture and celebrities are doing it and this and that. Yeah, and there's the whole debate over whether it's cultural appropriation or not. I literally had that written down in my notes about a conversation. I mean, we can get into that for sure. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. But, like, more so than, like, the exercise itself, the fact that this practice is able to spread the ability to tap into that mindset is probably the most phenomenal thing about it, especially in the West, where it's like, that is not a thing that people are taught growing up. They're not taught to, like, slow down and like monitor your thoughts and, like, then let them go. Right? It's did any of you were? I think it's starting to be more taught. I mean, there's a growing appreciation for that, and I mean, the education system would really benefit from including that. I mean, we have PE. Why not include mindfulness in every?
I wanted to talk to you about this because I saw a thing, and I've seen it a bunch actually recently, where kids that get put in detention, instead of being put in detention, they're put into, like, a meditative. I'm not sure if it's specifically yoga, but they're put into, like, they're put on mats and they lie down, they go through a body scan, and they do all of that stuff. Yeah. And it's crazy the results that they're getting, and it's tremendous. Like, why haven't we thought of this before? And it really is it's that American mindset of, why do you want to slow down? Speed up, speed up, speed up, speed up.
On a larger scale as well, they're offering yoga programs in prisons as well, as part of the rehabilitation process.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And it makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So where do you fall on this cultural appropriation?
On the cultural appropriation? Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that it's all about, like, how you approach it, right? I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with taking a tradition from another culture and using it using it to your benefit. I mean, this is a science that's universal, and I've spoken to, personally, I've never been to India, which I'm sad to say, but I'm planning to go next year.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I was there last year.
Cool. Yeah. Really looking forward to that trip. But, I've still, fortunately, where you live in a connected world digitally, and you don't necessarily need to go somewhere to be able to speak to people, from the source. And I've spoken to a number of Indian yoga practitioners and teachers who think it's fantastic, that yoga is being spread across the world. And there are a number of teacher training programs out of India that are primarily teaching people not from India, to go out and do this.
It's like a retreat almost.
Yeah, it's like this is the ripple effect. You can teach more people to teach yoga, and then your impact is exponentially magnified.
Yeah.
And yoga is not a selfish practice. It's really about selflessness and service, and expanding yourself so that you can be a better conduit of universal energy and be able to be a better servant of the world.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's hard for me to weigh in on this as a white American, but personally, I don't see anything wrong with it. I think it's great that more people practice yoga, whatever it takes to get more people into practicing yoga, especially when they truly understand what the goal is.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the cultural appropriation debate is one that I don't necessarily know what to think. I feel like maybe like what you said, as a white man from America, maybe I just can't really tap into the mindset of people who are offended. But it's probably just there's a right and wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think so people, and I'm in the same boat as both of you, obviously, but I think they might maybe want people to understand the science behind it a little more instead of just going to, yoga to the people once. And I don't see anything wrong with, going to yoga once a week or anything, but I think it would be beneficial for a lot of people to understand, to at least understand and to be knowledgeable about the tradition of it and the science behind it. And more like you were saying, is it NASA? How do you say it? The poses. Well, what is it?
Asana.
Asana. Yeah. You're correct in that. Like, people really know the poses, but they don't know that the mindset behind it, and they don't understand.
A lot of people have never heard of yoga outside of it's offered at my gym, and there are two ways to look at that. Like, yes, you're getting a very narrow perspective of what yoga is, but my take on it is, look, if that is like a little teaser, a little taste that gets people in the door, then at least you're getting something. And two, you're probably going to get a percentage of those people to get more interested and dive deeper.
Yep. Right. Like, what's the alternative? It'd be zero.
Yeah, it would be nothing. Right.
Yeah. You just have to present things in a language and in an angle that appeals to your, for lack of a better word, market. We're in a capitalist system, right? And business are the things that have enough resources to be able to propagate something in a wide way. So they're thinking about how to get people in the door, how to get people on the mats, and they have a business incentive to do that. Sure, that's great.
Right.
But the actual effect and true nature of the practice is going to come out too.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's just going to kind of come out with it.
Yeah. But let me just play devil's advocate really quick for those who are listening and don't really understand this debate at all. There is definitely some wild misrepresentation of yoga out there going on.
Like what?
In the social media world, you see people who are using the name yoga, but really they're just like flaunting around in their underwear on their bed. And it's like, I can see how you would be offended by that,
Right, yeah.
I've even been a little bit triggered by that at times, but then I'm just like, okay, why am I getting upset by this? Generally, whenever you're upset by something, in my experience, and it's really just you're seeing something that reflects back on you that this is upsetting to you, and it's like, oh, do I feel a little bit bad about how I'm on social media presenting myself?
Yeah.
And
well, it's something that you can apply to like many disciplines. Like, I'm a musician, and as a musician, like, it's so easy. Now, this isn't necessarily like a cultural thing, but it's the same thing where it's like, okay, I play guitar. That person's just DJing. Like, that's not music. It's like the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it's just like, I'm just feeling insecure that he's doing what I'm doing, just in a different way. It's all projecting insecurities on somebody else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
It's so funny how musicians really do. My dad does
but
the same thing.
But everybody does that. Yeah. Everybody. It's not just yoga. It's not just music.
No,
it's like
not.
drawing. It's like, he's not a true artist. Like, he's just doodling. He doesn't know how to use oil paints.
In martial arts, it happens all the time. In martial arts, it's like, oh, he does soft martial arts. He doesn't do hard martial arts. So he's not a real martial artist. It's like, you might think that, but in what he does, it's different, but it's still martial arts. It's still considered that. So it's weird how we do that.
Yeah, and it's
people don't realize it too. You know, good on you for being able to step back and
of course,
and kind of look at yourself and reflect and realize that.
With the whole like just the focus on social media for yoga teachers, like it's like critical. You basically have to do it these days. There's a lot of that conversation going on, and it's funny because it happens in like every direction. Like you'll see people look at someone who has amazing yoga poses, like really difficult, like physically rigorous and challenging postures to accomplish, and they think, oh, that person couldn't possibly be a true yogi because they're just a gymnast. You know, and then
they get it from somewhere else.
Yeah, they got it from somewhere else, or they're too focused on the physical. They've missed the esoteric, subtler practices.
It's so funny how we like that is like the default. Like that's what we default back to when we see something like that, instead of just like being like, oh, good for them. Good for them. Right? It's so interesting.
Yeah.
And also it's completely counter to like the values of yoga to be judgmental of someone else's practice in the first place.
Yeah.
Like check yourself.
Yeah. How is the being a yoga instructor right now? Because I understand that a lot of people are getting certified to become yoga instructors, right? So is there, just like strictly from like a professional, like making a living standpoint, like is it like an oversaturated market? Are you able to make a living off of practicing yoga?
Most of the yoga teachers I know who are thriving have some kind of side hustles going on.
Gotcha.
It's difficult to make a living and a sustainable living and live in a place like New York if you're just teaching group yoga classes in a yoga studio. Because like you said, yes, tons of people are getting certified like every single day.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why that is because yoga studios have a tough time surviving as a business.
Right.
There's a lot of overhead, and classes are fairly cheap, even if you think that they're expensive, like really to cover all their costs and pay the teachers and pay the rent on the studio. And if it's a hot yoga studio, they got to pay for like the HVAC system.
Donation based. A lot of them are donation based.
Yeah, donation based. I mean, so in order for them to stay afloat, they have to have higher ticket offerings. And so they're kind of pressured to offer teacher trainings where they can collect $2,000, $3,000 checks a couple times a year.
Right.
So what you end up with is a ton of registered yoga teachers and not necessarily enough classes throughout all the studios, even when there is a studio on every block of the city, to give people a full-time schedule. But there are definitely ways to make a good living as a yoga teacher. Teaching private lessons is big.
That's what I was going to bring up.
And if you've been teaching for long enough and you have enough of a reputation and enough to share, then you can go on and create your own teacher training program. You can do retreats.
Really?
Workshops are good, to go around traveling and do a little tour.
So to train other instructors, you just have to be registered yourself?
Well, no, there's a different level of registration and certification for that too.
Okay.
But that's another debate. I mean, there's so many things going on in the yoga world. There's a body called Yoga Alliance, which is like the gold standard registration organization, and they accredit studios to offer teacher trainings, and you can put your Yoga Alliance stamp on your sales page for your teacher training, and then as a teacher trainee or as a graduate of a training program, you get to say, oh, I'm Yoga Alliance RYT. You might have seen those letters, RYT. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's like anything else. I mean, we collectively agree to assign value to it, but I actually don't even have the RYT. Like I've done a couple of teacher trainings and I didn't go through with the registration through their body because I didn't think it meant anything and I didn't want to really pay for that.
That happens a lot in the martial arts world where like you'll take a franchised name. Like let's say like there are a lot of, Gracie Baja, which is a huge name in jiu-jitsu, and in opening up your own jiu-jitsu school, it would be very hard. Right, because if you don't have a name in jiu-jitsu, it's really hard to get. People want to go for the name, just like people probably want to go for that stamp. It's like we assign a value to it almost. But in doing that, I think you have to pay like $10,000 a year or something.
Oh,
for
that's
that
a
stamp.
lot.
So that franchise, it's like
Wow.
that whole, it's a business, as much as
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
this like ethereal thing or this, this practice, it's a business
Yeah.
at the end of the
That
day.
sounds like a thriving business.
It
$10,000.
is. I mean, well, listen, the
Jeez.
Gracies have a very, substantial business going. So,
But the hustle of like having like a side gig and then like a main gig like applies to a lot of things these days. Like I know like for martial arts, right? You can give private instruction.
Yes,
and,
and that's
you
the
also
big
and a
way
lot
to
of
do
people
it.
do that, right?
Yep.
I'm an adjunct professor,
Okay.
and it's the same thing. Like adjuncts. I actually read an article comparing adjunct professors to yoga instructors because the hustle is so similar in that like you're going from school to school and it's oversaturated because there are a lot of people that are doing this like while they're in PhD programs in these large urban centers and there's not enough classes to go around.
Right.
It's teaching classes, right? And so a lot of adjuncts have to have like 2 or 3 gigs on the side, whether it's private tutoring, so the private lessons, or just like, a part-time job like within the university that's not teaching or
Right.
something like that.
Yeah.
So it's everybody these days. It seems like unless you're in like we were saying, like that cookie cutter, like I'm an accountant now,
Yeah,
like
right.
I can make this salary a year. Like everybody's hustling, especially in this city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's hard, and maybe you can speak on this a little bit. Like, I know you were saying it's hard in the city to maintain a living doing just yoga, but I wonder if it would almost be harder outside of the city, not because it's, more expensive in the city or anything, but because of that factor of having to jump from school to school. And when you're in the suburbs, there might only be like 2 schools in your area. So it's like, okay, I'm teaching 2 classes today, one at this school,
You kind of
one
have
at
to
the
be,
other
like,
school.
urban center.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting
Yeah.
too, where yoga really in the U.S., at least in my opinion, maybe it's because I just live in New York, but it kind of started in New York, and it's very much a city-centered thing.
That's
and
anything
yeah,
though.
yeah.
Everything like this
Well,
starts in the city and then
it branches out, of
disperses,
course.
Yeah.
But it's still really apparent in the cities. A lot of people in New York do yoga, and a lot of people stay in New York and teach yoga. So I wonder if you think it would be harder to live in like in an outskirt and trying to teach yoga, even though it's cheaper.
Possible, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's sort of a supply and demand thing. If you go to a place where there's less demand for yoga, then there are going to be fewer studios.
Right.
But there are also going to be probably fewer teachers. So
Right.
I don't know. It probably
balance.
matches. But at the same time, yeah, totally. I mean, yoga feels very mainstream here, but there are parts of the middle of the country where people are still like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's not Christian. That's like false idols.
Those poses.
Have you heard that before? Have you heard like people?
Not directly, but I know that is happening.
Really?
Yeah, I've never had anybody say that to me personally, but
What is the catch with Christianity versus yoga?
They associate it with another religion.
yeah. And which is true. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's based in
Oh,
Vedanta,
Yeah.
Hindu scripture. But it's
People need
like
to open up.
but that's the melange of cultures. Like that's the cultural appropriation thing. Like can you borrow something and apply it to yourself in a way that is valuable to you?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Especially when you when we say that it's rooted in Hinduism, then I really do actually start to understand why some people might be upset about it, because it is like especially with religion, right? It's so personal and it's so rooted in a culture, and if this is a component of a religion and people that practice that religion see like you said, people.
I don't know that it's necessarily a component of religion. It's just that they developed within context of one another.
Yeah.
So it's hard to remove one from the other.
Yeah.
Like yoga was, when it was first codified by Patanjali, which is I think something like 5,000 BC or around that time. I could be wrong about that. I don't know, but it was a long time ago. It was basically just like a science of how to be a better person.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, you can call that religion if you want or not. It's just like it's a code of conduct.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And the poses, I've spoken on this before already, but the poses are a very small piece of that. It's like the first 2 limbs of the 8-limbed path of yoga are just like things that you should and should not do.
Right.
It's like the 10 Commandments.
Right.
So do you think the link, so it's the poses are a small part of that, but also the goal is to, embody this mentality and lifestyle, right? How do they interact with one another? Like, how do the poses lead to living a better life?
So the reason why the poses are in there is they help you fulfill a requirement, which is called tapas. Tapas is the burning of austerity. So if you look at yoga as a purification system, then the poses help you to create a fire that burns out the impurities. It's a rigorous form of physical exercise.
Yeah.
And it's not the only way. It's not the only way to get the tapas. You can also get tapas through seeing something that you want, a desire, and restraining yourself from it. Ooh, that ice cream looks good, but I'm not going to have it because I have self-control.
Okay.
That's tapas also. And the reason why that is because desires make us feel good, but the long-term view of it is any desire eventually causes suffering. Because in the example of the ice cream, I have the ice cream. It looks good. It tastes good. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, right.
Now I'm suffering.
And now I feel bad.
So the more you can get away from the pull of desires in the first place, the less suffering there is.
So is it like maintaining the poses, that sustainment of that position and not breaking out of it? Is that...
Well, that's a personal preference. But for me, I really believe in holding poses. Yes. But some people, there are lots of different lineages and styles of even the physical side of yoga. And sometimes it's like quick movement. It's dynamic. It's mobile. It's, that's the vinyasa class.
Yeah. I guess I was just thinking like along the lines of like, if you're disciplining yourself, you're disciplining yourself not to eat the Ben & Jerry's pint of ice cream, right? Then like I could see like maintaining that pose, even if it's uncomfortable.
Right.
100%. I agree with you. Not everyone does.
Like chair pose. I don't want to stay there.
And it's like when those feelings come up, when you have the panic attack, when you feel all the nerves in your body and everything is telling you, get out of here. And you stay.
Yep.
Yes, that's tapas.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
It's really interesting because I have thought about when I'm in yoga class, but when I always tie everything back to martial arts, and I apologize, but when I was in martial arts when I was a kid, we would have to sit, because in traditional martial arts is very different than like the type of mixed martial arts that you see now. Traditional is very much like you might get in what we call a horse stance, which is where you open up your feet and they're parallel, and you have to sit in the stance, and sometimes my sensei would make us sit there for like 20 minutes. And that really gives you a sense of like you're in your head and all you're thinking about is, God damn, I just really want to stand up right now. Yeah. And, sometimes the discipline wouldn't come from yourself. It would be from him hitting you with a stick and making sure that you sit down there. Yeah. But it gives you this sense of like self-control, self-discipline. And it's really important, I think, for kids. And I've always advocated for kids martial arts, but even, for kids yoga. And what do you think? How do you think we can get that into like the educational system? Is there a way to do it? Because
I think it's happening. I really do. I mean, there are plenty of people and organizations that are introducing these programs into schools. It's challenging because schools are run by the state for the most part, and you have to get buy-in from upper management, which is like at the governmental level, and policy moves really slowly.
Yes.
But you can use private schools as a model. I think that's happening a lot.
Yep. I was thinking like charter schools are really starting to do stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you have the case studies of like the great work that it's doing and the results, the detention, replacing that with mindfulness practice and seeing, how that's affecting these kids' behavior and their performance in schools. I mean, that's what it really comes to. That's what's going to get people to change their mind about it. Is like, do they get better SAT scores?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Now we'll do it.
Which is like, all right, like if that's what you need.
Well, I mean, think about it though. Like we have PE class, right? And this might just have been my school, but in my PE class, we played like kickball and handball and like these ridiculous games that like kids had fun doing, I guess, but it was 45 minutes a day, 3 days a week, and you didn't get anything out of it. But I feel like if you took that and replaced it with something like yoga, with something like martial arts,
it then
well,
becomes
I don't know. I mean, I think you get something out of that too. You learn how to, be collaborative. Yeah. And
there are things, for sure.
And you get some physical movement, which is great too.
Yes. Yeah. I just think that maybe
it could be diversified.
We're thinking about it wrong, and it could be diversified, and you could have other benefits as well. Because I don't think in kickball, I learned any self-discipline. I don't think in like handball I learned any self-control.
Yeah.
You know, I think that those things are really, especially now with kids, those things are really important.
Yeah.
And they don't have any other avenue to get it.
The only other way you learn that is through, it seems, being punished. Like when you don't, you know, like.
Well, that's what happened in martial arts. You get punished.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is like for those games and those other, like the kickball and the handball, like if you don't want to do it, you can just like slink back in the corner.
Right. There's no real push.
And you can keep running away. You can't really keep running away if you are forced to confront yourself.
Well, and that's the real difference, right? It in a team, and I've always advocated for individual sports as well, because with a team you can kind of blame it on the team, right? It's like, oh, my team lost this baseball game. Yeah, well, the pitcher sucked. You know, he was really bad this game. I did great out in right field not doing anything, but the pitcher sucked.
Yeah, it's all Jimmy's fault.
Yeah, it's all Jimmy. It's all Jimmy. Damn Jimmy. But with like individual sports and stuff, like I know when I went to tournaments and, you know, and you're in a kickboxing match or you're in a sparring match and everything and you lose, there is nobody's fault that you lost except for yours. And you have to sit and face that and confront that.
Yeah.
And
but
maybe not.
Yeah, and that's really empowering, right? Like to take accountability for what happens in your life. Yes, I mean you have to surrender certain things to faith, whatever, and like the power of the unknown. But yes, like if you can take accountability for your failures, it means you can also take accountability for changing it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like and I always tell my kids this because I teach martial arts now, and I tell my kids when they lose, I just went to a tournament on Sunday. It's you don't lose, you win, or you learn, and you have to learn. If you don't learn, then this whole thing was worth nothing. Right. You know, in fact, losing sometimes is the best thing for a kid, or best thing for anyone, because you are forced to then go back to, you know, the dojo or go back to the school or go back to the yoga studio and really confront like, okay, what am I doing wrong? What do I need to fix? And that's what forces you to get better. Yeah. With a team thing, it's like I said, like, oh, fuck Jimmy. Jimmy did everything wrong. I was great out in right field, but it was Jimmy's fault.
Yeah, and then you don't change.
Right. Exactly. You don't do anything to improve yourself. Yeah. So it would be and I'm glad that you say that it's happening in schools. I would love to see it happen more in public schools, but of course it's policy and all that jib jab.
Yeah.
Sucks.
Yeah, but at least it's starting somewhere, right?
Yeah. It's a slow process. Everything's a slow process.
Yeah. And there's precedent for it. There's a famous yogi who I think he's one of the main entities responsible for bringing yoga to the West. A guy named Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote a book called Autobiography of a Yogi, and he has he's got a bunch of centers in California and I think probably elsewhere now too, called the Self-Realization Fellowship. And back when he was in India, he had schools, to teach kids just like how to be people. It wasn't like teaching math. It was like, how do you breathe? How do you watch yourself? And it wasn't even yoga poses either. It was just like, how do you exist in harmony with other people?
Right.
Like, which is so important.
How do you be a good person? And that's
you
so
would
much
think that would be
important.
a part of the core education, right? Like one of the core classes that you have to take.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's like we want to raise our kids because you can raise your kid to be the best mathematician or whatever, but if they suck at being a person when they get older, no one's going to want to hire them. No one's going to want to work with someone like that. So you might be good at math, you might be good at science, you might be good at English, whatever. But if you're not a good person...
But not only that, like, it's not only, like, outward, like, people's perception of you, it's their perception of themselves, So as they get older, like, they probably won't get hired, but also, like, how are they handling their anxiety? How are they handling depression? Like, how do they cope with that?
How do they get through their day-to-day? How do they, push through the adversity that they're going to have in, the obvious adversity that everyone has in life? Yeah. And I think something like yoga and...
Everybody needs a discipline, like something to... self-discipline themselves. Right. Yeah. For sure.
Well, also something to be like, you're not the best at everything.
True.
There's a lot of people like that. And individual things kind of force you to have that mentality a little bit or to step back.
That's part of the education system now too. It's just like everybody's like special, which is true. Everybody is special, but you're also not special in your specialness.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. if everyone's special, then nobody's special, right?
Right.
Because everyone's special.
Yeah. There's even like studies that show that over like the past 2 decades, there's been like a major inflation of grades in like the education
Really?
system where, well, it's like everybody gets an A.
Well,
And there's, you know, there's things like reasons for that, like job security. If teachers want to keep their job, the students have to perform well. And so everybody's grades are inflated, even though Jimmy didn't deserve Jimmy was goofing off all semester, but he still got a B+.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now there's a generation of people who think, you know, and like this sounds really harsh, but there's an illusion that they're better or like more intelligent, or they don't need
Just
to
higher performing.
yeah, their performance is not necessarily their self-awareness of their performing capabilities is not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, and then when they get into a true meritocracy,
and
then they're
it's
in
shocking.
for a world of hurt.
Yeah,
Right.
It can be really shocking, I think, for
that's
a lot
what
of
causes
people.
the anxiety and the depression and all that stuff. Is because now it's I'm not the best. You have to kind of face reality a little bit.
Yeah.
You really got to face it, and people aren't prepared for that when they're handed participation trophies. And you know, I remember in high school there was so many kids that would sit in the back with their head on the desk and not do anything in class, and yet all of a sudden that kid was still somehow in like the top tier of classes, like, you know, in the level ones, I guess you would call it. And it's like, okay, they might be like smart and everything, but you got to take that into account a little bit, that they're not paying attention, they're not really driven to do anything, and they might not be putting out the best work. But you know, if you're just going to hand them an A, what are you really doing for them other than, you know, giving them this false sense of
And reinforcing current behavior.
right?
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh yeah, this is okay. And now they're 25 years old, they're in their job, and they're falling asleep at their desk because
It's not going to work.
it's not going to work. No.
So like bringing this back to yoga, what do you tell your do you call them students, yoga students?
Yeah.
What do you tell your students, like when they fall out of a pose or something, or if you see them like they're trying and they're not getting it, like what's your approach to that?
Well, I mean, if you're trying and not getting it, then amazing, great. If you're trying, then I'm happy. But I take a very mechanical approach to the poses. As much as I know that poses are not everything about yoga, I love the poses. I love doing my poses, and I love working on them. Like, I think having something that you're really interested in improving and developing is really powerful for anything, you know?
Yeah.
So I love working on my poses, and I love helping students work on them. So if they've demonstrated an interest in that, I'm really happy.
Yeah.
Falling out of a pose is not a sign of failure or anything like that. I mean, it's just part of it.
Yeah.
And a lot of what I tell students is just that. It's like reframing their mindset around what it means to fail and what it means to practice.
Yes. Yeah, failure is such a harsh word.
Yeah.
It really is. And the associations that people have with that word are really intense.
Yeah.
Really intense.
Well, they think they're nothing. It's like you broke them as soon as you tell them that they failed. And you know, bring it back to what I say to my kids. It's like, you're not failing, you're learning.
Yeah. Right. Well, you didn't
constantly
fail.
learning.
You tried.
Like,
yeah.
And that's just as good, you know, in the long run. Maybe not in the short game, you know, of like, oh, I wanted to get this pose today. Well, you didn't. You know, you didn't get this pose today. But you're building towards getting that pose a month from now.
One step closer.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, like, getting the pose doesn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the work
Right.
that
Yeah.
you do to get there that actually does the thing and has the effect on you. So if you fall out or you get it, honestly, it's like kind of better if you don't get it, because you still have something to keep working on.
Yeah, I think everybody's really accustomed to like instant gratification these days, and just like, you know, I want ice cream, so boop, and now it's here, right? So it's like the same thing. Like, I want to do this pose, but I can't, and now I'm very upset.
And I brought it back to social media a lot, but like, you see people like putting their leg behind their head or doing the scorpion, whatever, and you see that and you're like, oh, I can't do it yet, so I'm failing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they've already got it, so they don't get to work on learning how to do that anymore.
Right.
You know, so you're in a great place if you can't.
Right.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
you want, I mean, I only, you know, I'm not a consistent yoga practitioner by any means, and I would love to be. But I know that when I go to yoga class, it really is like the best part of it is, for me at least, is getting into a pose and really struggling with that pose. Because if I can hold a pose, like if I'm good at like one particular pose, it's like, all right, like let's move on.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like
mastered it.
I've got
It's
this. Like,
done.
and that might be like literally the most like standing up straight for me.
Mountain.
Yeah.
I'm good at that one.
Yeah.
But like that, and that's really that's what makes you want to work. So if it really is, you know, something like yoga and something like anything that's individual really forces you to, I guess, kind of step back from that instant gratification and realize that like, no, things are a process, and like you're gonna get it eventually, and then you'll have something else that you got to work towards, you know.
Yeah, and I think coming to that realization is also a process unto itself. Like in the beginning, it's perfectly normal, and you shouldn't beat yourself up if you are chasing postures.
Right.
But like at this point, I mean, I've got a lot of postures under my belt, and I can do them, I can pull them out. It's not a big deal. And now when I like see somebody else do something that I can't do yet, I'm like, yes, oh my God, like I'm inspired to try something that I can't do. I'm struggling with it. Like right now, I've been recently practicing a little bit at the Dharma Yoga Center. There's an amazing teacher named Sri Dharma Mitra who, he's like in his 80s, and he smiles like a child every single day. It's just like, you know, if we can all be like that when we're in our 80s, then we did a good job. He teaches all these different headstand variations where he like takes his hands away and stuff. And I've just never worked on that. So now I'm like getting really like giddy about practicing that. And it's fun, you know, because I'm not even close.
Right.
It's just not something in my wheelhouse yet.
Well, what a great mentality to like seek out things and be happy when you're challenged with something.
Yeah.
When adversity
Constantly
is thrown
learning.
at you. Yeah.
It's like something people like lose once they get out of college and stuff. It's like, I don't want to learn anymore. I just want to like do work.
Yeah.
It's like, what's really the gratification in that, you know? I don't know if yoga is like this, but I'm sure it is. Like, is it like 1,000 poses? Like there's just thousands of poses that you can do. And yeah. And jiu-jitsu is the same way, where it's like you might like, I'm going to be rolling with someone, right? I'm going to be sparring with someone, and I might be trying this certain armbar variation or this certain choke variation over and over. I'm never going to get it. And then finally I do get it, and now I'm getting it every single time. And it's like, all right, well, I'm not going to go for that anymore. Now my teacher is showing me something new, and I'm going to go for this new thing, and it's going to take me months and months and months to get.
Yeah.
And it's that like constant, it's kind of built into the sport or into the activity, right? Of you're never going to be perfect. Like that's like kind of like the central kind of mentality.
Because how sad would that be?
Right.
If you already like did everything.
Then who
What do you
cares?
do?
Right.
Like,
Who cares?
I won yoga.
Right.
Yeah. Game's over. Just kick back, binge some Netflix for the rest of your life.
Well, actually, if you win yoga, that means you achieved liberation, and you no longer have to be in physical reality. So you did it.
Wow. You really did win. That's the lottery.
You're the golden boy.
Yeah. Speaking of like liberation and I guess like enlightenment, right? I don't know why I did quotation marks around that, but I guess because I don't fully understand, you know, the concept.
Yeah, me neither. But otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Do you consider yourself like a religious person or spiritual, or like where do you fall on that spectrum of belief versus non-belief?
You know, I was not raised in a religious family at all. My parents are, you know, Protestant Christians, but I wasn't even baptized. Like I'm the youngest of 5 kids. They all were baptized, but they kind of just got tired of it. We weren't going to church by the time I came around. Yeah. That happened with a lot of things. Like I didn't learn how to ride a bike either. They're just like, you got it. You ride a bike now? Yeah, I learned later. A friend taught me when I was like 8 years old. Yeah. But yeah, so I was not, you know, indoctrinated into any dogma of any kind. Yeah. And it wasn't really until I started practicing yoga and finding my own interest in some of the ways these ideas were expressed that I got connected to spirituality. And I would say that I am I don't even know what these words mean, but I guess non-religious spiritual person. I definitely believe in God. I believe in a higher power, and it's part of my practice to pray. I mean, I don't call it praying, but that's basically what I'm doing, is speaking to God and expressing gratitude to God and the forces that are not my own, but go through me.
Yeah. I was just reading an article the other day that was like about how we need to start reframing. You know, everything's moving in a direction now. Specifically, you hear about it a lot with gender of like non-binary and things like that. And it was talking about, you know, looking at belief versus non-belief as non-binary. Like, it's not just you're one or the other. Like, you can fall somewhere on that spectrum and be spiritual and believe in a higher power. But just because you believe in a higher power doesn't mean that you are, you know, part of organized religion or anything. Like, we have to get rid of these connotations.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not black or white. There's just
there
are different ways to look at things. It's a complicated topic, a very complicated concept. So you should allow room for different interpretations.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And I think it's so important to, I mean, me personally, to be spiritual in some capacity. I mean, and you know, that's my opinion, but I think that in a total like existential crisis of a world, I don't find it productive to think anything else, you know?
Well,
like I don't believe, like you said, I'm not religious either. I'm saying I'm like more like you, I would say, in that way. But there are, it's more than just like, there are so many positive benefits for your mental health and like kindness and cooperation that come along with thinking like that versus thinking that everything's meaningless and you have no purpose.
Right.
And we're all stuck in a meaningless vacuum of black hole nothingness. I just feel like the alternative is just, well, might as well, you know, be spiritual, like, you know?
Yeah. So. Well, I think there are, you know, plenty of atheists out there who would argue, well, I don't need to believe in God or anything larger or more powerful in order for me to be kind and compassionate, because there are practical benefits to doing that. We have a more productive society if we can be nice to each other and not kill each other. And that's true. Yeah. That's definitely true. But I also think on top of all those reasons to care, you know, basically that's what it is reasons to care, is you also have a support system underneath you for after you've done all of your work and done all the things you can to be your best self and to be the best version of your contributor to society. Is okay when everything I've done slips away, and if it doesn't work, I still have my faith in something bigger.
It's like easier to find that common thread, right, between everybody. Like, we're all one big community, and if you accept that there's something connecting us in some capacity, if you call it God or if you just call it a higher power or just like a force of energy,
whatever it is,
then the chances for all of those things that, yes, you said you could do believing in nothing, but it acts like a catalyst to produce them, right? It's like, well, I'm not going to treat, if you're me, right, if we're all me, like, I'm not going to treat myself poorly. And it is a catalyst for cooperation. It does help people cooperate. It does promote community. And so I think that, I don't know, it seems like we need to reframe like the death of God, you know, like that whole like big like transition that happened in the early 20th century, and just like reevaluate that, because I feel like it's just kind of been left there. You know, it's like, well, maybe it's not totally meaningless. Maybe there is some, yes, there are a lot of negatives that come along with religion, for sure. But maybe there are also some positives in there. Like, it lasted so long for a reason, right? It's persisted, and it's been found in every culture ever throughout human history. And so I find it difficult to believe that it has nothing positive to give anybody. Right. That's a difficult argument to make.
Yeah, you know? It is. Well, it's also, what needs to happen too is religions need to stop bashing one another, because we all have to accept, and spiritual, you know, spiritualities as well, all of them in one conglomerate, need to stop bashing each other and realize that, like, none of us really know what the hell is going on and what we are and where we came from and who's above us and who's below us, and and we need to understand that, like, you might believe this and you might believe this, but we all believe in at least something that clearly connects all of us to one, you know, specific thing, or to maybe a couple things, I don't know, but it connects us in some capacity. And while I don't think the answer, like you said, is to be atheist, you know, and to forget that we have any sort of connection at all, I think there does need to be some sort of agreement between communities. Like, yeah, maybe you're right about this, maybe I'm wrong about this, maybe I'm right about this, and maybe you're wrong about this, but there is something. And it doesn't matter whether it's Allah, whether it's God, whether it's the Buddha, whatever. It doesn't matter who's up there. It's something, and we're all underneath it.
Yeah, and it's like, can you see the forest for the trees? You know, like the details don't really matter too much.
Right.
Like they're really just mythologies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the underlying meaning that counts.
Right.
And all of these religions that have, you know, survived the centuries, like they speak and they tell their truth in poetic language because it's much more powerful in communicating the energetic and emotional underpinnings than to try to explain something logically.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm actually thinking about writing my thesis on that. Is like the need to like bring back like present like literature and possibly, you know, even like religious text as a form of communicating like these metaphysical concepts that are more difficult for some than others to grasp. Like you can explain an entire metaphysical concept to somebody and they'll just go, it's difficult. Like the language is difficult. It's very abstract and people's minds work in different ways. What literature does and what storytelling does is it allows you to understand these concepts. It like waters it down, but you still get out of it what you need to get out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to start thinking about these things like that again.
Yeah.
Like, yes, the Bible, you know, it's a story. Like it's a collection of stories and fables or whatever you want to call them. It doesn't mean that there's not messages within them, you know?
Yeah.
So like, I don't know. Like, I think that there is a place. I think that it's a really valuable tool to, you know, spread these messages and provide them to everybody. It's just another tool in the system to give somebody another medium to understand these things.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder if changing the phrase, because I know in like Western culture, the word religion has a certain connotation, right? It's kind of like a group mentality. It's a group thing. But in Eastern culture, spirituality is much more the word that I associate with it. Like you think of Eastern spirituality, and it's not so much I don't know if it's not so much a group thing, but just that word, at least for me, gives it a whole different connotation. And I don't know why that is, and I don't know if you know anything about that as to why it's, you know, yoga is like more of a spiritual thing rather than a religious thing. And what is like the gap between those two, and how can we kind of close that gap?
I don't know. I mean, to me, religion seems to carry a connotation of following strict rules. You know, there's like a spectrum of orthodoxy for sure, even within religion, but spirituality sounds more like something that's based on your own individual choices and beliefs.
Right.
And you can kind of create your own.
It's
like,
kind of free-flowing a little bit.
Pick and mix.
Right.
Yeah.
But religion is like, okay, I've identified with this group, therefore I do what they do, I believe what they believe, I act as they act, and I'm part of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have a friend. I was just back home. I'm from Boston. I was just back home recently, and he's like one of my best friends, and he just told me that he found out that his little brother was gay, right? And they're a very religious family, and
Christian,
yes, and it was really
Irish
sad.
Catholic?
No, actually no, but they are Catholic.
Okay.
I believe. He might correct me if I'm wrong, but anyway, he found out because his brother was searching, you know, will I go to hell for being gay? And it's like, wow, that's such a religious thing it's such a Christian thing to be thinking about. Like, as soon as I separate myself from this in any form, in any which way, all of a sudden I've committed a sin, I've broken the commandment, I guess, and now I'm going to hell. Whereas with spirituality, it's like, no, like you can do that as long as you are still, you know, in this, you know, blur of a bubble, not this hard to find bubble, but you're in this blur of a bubble, you're fine. Like, as long as you have like these good qualities about you, you're okay. But with religion, it's like as soon as you step out of that bubble, it's like you're you know, ostracized almost.
Yeah.
And I wonder if we just changed it change the name.
Let's change it.
Let's just change it. We'll start it right now. We're starting to move.
Everybody listening from here on out, what should we call it?
It's the Christian spirituality. It's not the Christian religion.
Oh, we got to be more creative than that.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
I don't know what it would be. But it's really like it's apparent how the difference and how crazy that difference is between a spiritual, a spiritual being and a religious being, and you're right, it's very defined over here, and it's kind of more free flowing over here.
There's actually a really this is a bad word to use, but I'm gonna use it anyway, like a cult followed book. It's not a cult, but it's like kind of like a subculture book. A scripture, I guess that's what they call a channeled text, where like the writer doesn't take credit for writing it, but it was like downloaded from a message, and then she wrote it out. It's called A Course in Miracles. And the book is really interesting because it is what you're talking about. It's Christian language. So they talk about like the Holy Spirit and even Jesus. I believe Jesus' name is used. But the underlying message is very, very different from what is taught in Catholicism. It's not about sin. The whole thing is to reprogram your ideas about what is sin, because the human is love, the human is divine consciousness, and the human cannot sin. This whole scripture is about teaching you how to forgive yourself and forgive other people. It's like, if you can do the work of walking around and blessing and forgiving every single person you see, then that's it. You did it.
It's interesting because forgiveness is such a pillar of that entire religion too, but it's interesting to see that you can see it into such different ways, like looking at the same concept of forgiveness.
It's also a very unforgiving religion.
Yeah.
It's like they preach forgiveness, but it's very unforgiving.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So it's a bit of like
you can be forgiven for some things.
Yeah.
But for other things.
But the fact that it's even like handed out in that way, like, do you get it? Do you get the forgiveness?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, as long as you go sit in that box and you tell someone, you're forgiven. I guess.
Exactly.
And you don't do it again.
Yeah.
Well, here starts the revolution of religion in this room today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The new religion. Oh no, let's not say that.
Yeah.
That'd be
just
bad.
Follow us. Now we're a cult. But we're gonna have to cut this off here because we got work. We have real jobs we have to go to.
Those job things are always getting in the way.
I know. Yeah. But this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is great.
It's a great conversation. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Do you want to pitch anything, or there's things I want to talk about that I didn't get to? Like, I know you said you have
again too. We can
maybe we'll do a follow-up episode.
Yeah,
that'd be cool. You know what I will pitch? Just one thing is I have a podcast too. So I talk to yoga teachers and yoga practitioners about the concept of dharma, which it has a lot of different interpretations, but really means like the path or purpose that you follow in this life. So my podcast is called Dharma Talk with Henry Winslow, and it's on all the podcast directories, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. So check it out.
Yeah, cool. We'll put a link in the bio for anybody that's interested.
Yep. Yeah, we'll put a link right down there.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys later.